This has been a failed presidency. And I'm absolutely convinced that if we want to get jobs again in this country, it's going to be helpful to have a person who's had a job in the private sector to create jobs in the private sector.
Mitt Romney wins the Iowa Caucus by a mere 8 votes over Rick Santorum, taking an early lead in the race to become the GOP challenger. Staying in the US, the Fed will start publishing rate projections starting at its January policy meeting. The Fed will also offer forecasts on the first rate hike. And Twitter apologizes for incorrectly verifying a false account for Wendy Deng, wife of News Corp chief Rupert Murdoch. Right, other top world news stories on Reuters this morning. Iran ratchets up the tensions with the West in its most aggressive statement after months of saber rattling. Tehran is threatening to take action if the US Navy moves an aircraft carrier into the Gulf. And the commander of Syria's armed rebels is warning attacks on the Assad regime could be stepped up. Opposition forces are frustrated by Arab League monitors' lack of progress in ending the government crackdown on protests. A mixed picture on 2012's first full day of trading in Asia. Here's Reuters' Tara Joseph in Hong Kong.
Hello, Axel. A fresh start for the trading year with China and Japan now back in action. And in Tokyo, Japanese businessmen and women gathering at one of Tokyo's most famous shrines. They're praying for prosperity on the first official workday of the new year. In China, the yuan hitting a record high as the central bank sets the midpoint for the currency at a new high. Many expecting further rises in the yuan in the near term. Here's a snapshot of the closing numbers. Japan's Nikkei gaining 1.2%. That helped by upbeat U.S. data. Here in Hong Kong, the Hang Seng closing lower, though, as Chinese investors continue to take a grim view of stocks. And finally, PetroChina becoming the first Chinese state-owned company to wholly own a Canadian oil sands development. They bought out a partner in the latest stake. It is the latest in a spate of China buys in Canadian energy, $5.5 billion worth over the past 6 months alone. Axel?
Tara, thanks a lot. Let's get to Peter Dixon at Commerzbank for more on that shift in the Fed's communication strategy. Morning to you, Peter. Is this going to change investors' decision-making processes?
I don't think so. I mean, to a large degree, you know, the Fed has been pretty transparent over the course of probably the last 15, 16 years anyway. I think all they're doing is, you know, formalising the process perhaps a bit more and relying a little bit less on the, you know, the nudges and winks. But I think the Fed has always had ample opportunity to get its message across. I don't think this is going to change the way in which we think about it.
Is it going to change the way the ECB and the Bank of England do things?
It might at the margin. I mean, certainly the Bank of England is pretty open anyway. The one thing which the bank doesn't do, of course, is give forecasts for the path of interest rates. So that's something which perhaps they might think about down the line, seeing depending on how well the Federal Reserve does. The ECB, to be honest, there does seem to be a desire not to give away too much information. So I don't imagine that this is going to be a precursor to a change in ECB strategy.
All right, and the Bund auction today, there were a couple of technical fails last year at Bund auctions. Is there a risk of that today?
Well, as you said, I think there were technical failures. I mean, I think demand for bunds generally remains pretty strong, and we're hopeful that the full amount will get away quite easily.
All right, Peter, many thanks. On Reuters counterparties, a piece in the New Yorker takes issue with a New York Times article on Rick Santorum. The Times quotes Santorum accusing Obama of absolutely un-American activities, but fails to find out what these activities are. Political journalism, unlike war reporting, long ago stopped being about what is true or important, concludes the New Yorker, and says there is plenty of this type of reporting around. On Twitter, aside from oil and Mideast tensions, there's a story on Research in Motion trending right now, how RIM is close to stripping its co-CEOs of chairmanship, and a piece on the falling Groupon share price as merchants pull back. Before we go, quick check on where the European markets have started expecting to pull back after 4 consecutive up days, and they have indeed. The FTSE 100, though, toying with the unchanged mark right now. That is it. I'll leave you with our pick of the day. Reuters photographer Amir Dolsh took this shot of a veiled woman casting her vote in the third round of elections in Egypt. I'm Axel Threlfall. This is Reuters.